One of the most shocking executions of Henry VIII's time on the throne was when Sir Thomas More went to his death on Tower Hill. He was a scholar and a well-respected man across England, who worked as a Lord Chancellor for the infamous Tudor King. But he was a man of principle, and someone who could not be converted to another way of thinking, and he would not be swayed. Because of this he was condemned to death, as he refused to support the King's second wife, Boleyn, and he would also refuse to accept Henry VIII as the supreme head of the Church of England. But More's execution on Tower Hill was brutal, and was at the hands of an axeman who did perform the job well, but shockingly his remains were actually buried with some form of dignity, unlike other executed people, yet his head has not been laid to rest alongside his body, and this allegedly still exists inside of a church. Join us today as we look at the severed head of Sir Thomas More, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Sir Thomas More had a number of issues with King Henry VIII in the final years of his life, as he would refuse to accept the King's supremacy over the Church, and he would rather support the Pope. He would not accept the Act of Supremacy or the Oath of Supremacy, and it was made a crime to support the Pope, and More argued with the King himself a number of times with regards to religion. But the King and his chief adviser Thomas Cromwell would go further, and the pair then forced all members of the clergy and those in positions of power to swear to support the King's supremacy and law, and More refused to take the oath, and he also rejected the annulment of Henry VIII and his first wife Catherine of Aragon's marriage, and with this it was clear that his life would only go downhill from here. There were many attempts to get him to conform, but he could not do so. Thomas More was forced to resign from his role as a Lord Chancellor on the 16th of May 1532, but remained at court as an adviser to the King, but his enemies would force him out. His religious views and opposition to Anne Boleyn contributed to his fall from grace, and he refused to attend the coronation of Anne as the Queen of England, and this caused a huge amount of offence. This was seen as direct opposition to the King and Queen, and some believed it was even treason, but Henry then took action and charged Thomas More with taking bribes. This was later dropped, but Cromwell then worked on finding other ways to get rid of Thomas More. He was accused of advising the Nun of Kent, Elizabeth Barton, who had predicted the death of Henry VIII. This was said to have been treasonous, but then in April 1534, he was summoned to meet with key advisers and members of the Privy Council with regards to the oath of succession. Thomas More was told to accept it and swear allegiance to it, and he did accept that Parliament had the right to make Anne Boleyn Queen, but he refused to accept this himself, and he questioned the validity of the marriage, and said that the wedding was not seen as proper in the eyes of God. Yet again Sir Thomas More refused to take the oath of succession, and Henry VIII had enough of this. He then tried to take stronger action against the rebellious former Lord Chancellor, and Henry VIII imprisoned More inside the Tower of London. He was held rather comfortably to begin with, whilst inside of the Tower Cromwell even visited a number of times to get him to conform, hoping that the threat of the Tower would be enough to do this. But Thomas More was a man who was willing to die for his beliefs and cause, and he was charged with high treason and was brought to trial on the 1st of July 1535. Some of the judges included the family members of Queen Anne Boleyn, including her own father, and Thomas More was a clever man who at times baffled the judges. He refused to answer a number of questions, but Richard Rich, a man who is considered one of the most horrific Tudor men, was called to testify, and he claimed falsely that More had denied in his presence the King's supremacy over the Church. Because of this he was then found guilty of treason a matter of minutes later, and was then sentenced to death. More replied to the death sentence that no temporal man may be the head of spirituality, and claimed the Act of Supremacy was against Magna Carta. He was sentenced to be hanged, drawn and quartered, however Henry commuted this to a simpler beheading, which was said to have been less painful. On the 6th of July 1535, More was taken to Tower Hill, where he faced his execution, and the crowd that day were there to witness the proceedings, and it was huge. They saw a man going to his death for his beliefs, and one account of the execution claims, about 9 he was brought out of the tower. His beard was long, his face pale and thin, and carrying a red cross in his hand. He often lifted his eyes to heaven. A woman meeting him with a cup of wine, he refused it, saying, Christ at his passion drank no wine, but gall and vinegar. Another woman came crying and demanded some papers. She said she had left in his hands when he was Lord Chancellor, to whom he said, Good woman, have patience but for an hour, the King will rid me of the care I have for those papers, and everything else. Another woman followed him crying, He had done her much wrong when he was Lord Chancellor, to whom he said, "I very well remember the cause, and if I were to decide it now, I should make the same decree." When he came to the scaffold it seemed ready to fall, whereupon he said merrily to the lieutenant, "Pray sit, see me safe up, and as to my coming down, let me shift for myself." Being about to speak to the people, he was interrupted by the sheriff, and thereupon he only desired the people to pray for him, and bear witness he died in the faith of the Catholic Church, a faithful servant to God and the king. Then kneeling he repeated the Miserere psalm with much devotion, and rising up the executioner asked him for forgiveness. He kissed him and said, "Pick up thy spirits, man, and be not afraid to do thine office. My neck is very short. Take heed, therefore, thou strike not awry, for having thine honesty." Laying his head upon the block, he bid the executioner stay, till he had put his beard aside, for that had committed no treason. Thus he suffered with much cheerfulness. His head was taken off at one blow, and was placed upon London Bridge, where having continued for some months, and being thrown into the Thames to make room for others, his daughter Margaret brought it, enclosed it in a leaden box, and kept it for a relic. But the story of Sir Thomas More's head is one which is captivating and incredible. The first thing to mention is that following his execution, the body of More was taken back into the Tower of London, and specifically the Chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, where it was buried inside of the crypt there, along with many other people who were executed on Tower Hill. But the head of More was then taken to London Bridge, as was customary, and it was dipped in tar and preserved in a number of ways by the keeper of the heads, who then displayed the head of More above the gatehouse of the bridge, high up in the air. It was fastened to a pike for a month, as was customary, and every day the head of More was passed under by thousands of people. It was a horrific sight, and later his head would be replaced by that of another rebel member of government, Bishop John Fisher. However, there have been a number of claims regarding the head of More. It's believed that his daughter, Margaret Roper, managed to bribe the keeper of the heads to knock the head of her father down, and then she managed to take it away with her to preserve it for centuries. She managed to do this by covering it in spices, but it's considered that she may have even been imprisoned for this action. Margaret died in 1544, and the head of Sir Thomas More was buried alongside her, but in 1824 the vault of Margaret was opened, and then the head of More was placed on public display in St Dunstan's Church in Canterbury. It was visited by people for many years, but other historians have said that the head may have been buried and interred inside of a different tomb, which had been made for Sir Thomas More in Chelsea Old Church. But the majority of evidence regarding this, including eyewitnesses who visited the head, alludes to the fact that the head of More was placed back into the vault of his daughter's grave and was buried with her. It was actually photographed by someone who looked through a grille inside of the Roper vault, and it showed his daughter's lead casket and also the remains of Thomas More's skull. The life of Sir Thomas More at times was brilliant. He was a celebrated historian and scholar, but he was a man who would punish and be brutal himself, as he would deal with heretics severely who he did not agree with. He was a man of his principles, and he decided to not accept the king's changes to the church, and because of this he succumbed to his death at the hands of King Henry VIII. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.